Sorry?
It's very chazak also, Richard.
Yeah, we'll watch it. Okay. Welcome here. Please take a copy. So, Shalom Aleichem. You know, I have one thing to say. Maybe I'll say maybe I should start speaking before Mara before they do this. There's late night slichot for those who want.
Is there a night really married?
No, only 10 o'clock. We can't listen. We struggle with Minyan Mizrahi right now. We can't add more, you know. No, 10 was we had over 40 people came last night. It was packed. It's my Rebbe.
We had 20.
Hello. Coming to learn about as well. Sorry. All right. Okay. Somebody want to open a window? Maybe. Sorry. Okay. So we'll start. There's 10 o'clock tomorrow rather than 9:30. Sorry. But it worked well. There were over 40 people at Slichot last night. So I think many of whom otherwise would not have come in the morning. So we're going to be learning about a mitzvah. There's online, there's here, that we can really basically only do once every 7 years. And Tzurba had it. They had a whole Shemitah volume apparently, which never made it here. You got it. Okay, so it did make it here. It never made it here. And I'm trying to work with them for Tzurba 12 because they've changed it all.
I bought the whole set for 180.
Sorry.
I bought the whole set for
Really?
American, Australian. Correct.
Anyway, so yeah, we have to work out what we're doing for volume 12. They've changed the whole way that we buy Tzurba now in Australia, and it has to be through Amazon, or we can get through America, might be slightly cheaper. But they have a whole thing on Shemitah, and obviously this is a mitzvah. We discussed the Lunch and Learn Shemitah, which all of you attend more or less. We didn't discuss Shemitah Ksafim and determination of debts. So I'll just open up share screen for those following online. Sorry. How can I avoid them? Sorry. Okay, just a simple life. All right. Okay. Beseda. All right. So.
Hi guys.
Come. So. Okay, moving on. Okay, so let's turn to page 229. Okay, so Shmitat Ksafim as a mitzvah. So we know this appears basically in Parashat Re'eh, source 1 on page 229. Miketz Sheva Shanim Taseh Shmita. So there's the end. We're going to get to the word Miketz in a minute, but at the end of 7 years, you've got to do Shmita. V'zed Var HaShmita. Right, this is the matter of the Shmita. Shamot, to release. Kol Baal Mashay Yado, any creditor who has Asher Yashem Re'ehu, who credits his friend. Lo Yigoset Re'ehu, may not literally press. Ligos is like to press from his friend. Et Achiv, or his brother. Ki Karash Mita Lashem. Okay, so we have the command of, on the one hand, the positive command of Shamot, that there is a command to Shamot, to release debts, but also the negative command of Lo Yigos, that you're not allowed to press, to push. You're not allowed to push your friends for Shemitah. Okay. All right. Okay. We do know, however, in contrast, Et HaNachri Tigos, you're allowed to push and exact money and debts from a Nachri, from a non-Jew. Whereas that which is your brothers, i.e. your fellow Jews, Tashmet Yadecha, your hand must release. So the word Shemitah, it doesn't really appear in this context. It appears in Mishpatim, but in the Parshat Bahar, when we have the mitzvah Shemitah, it's only ever called Shabbat Lashem. Only here in Re'eh and also in Mishpatim is it called Shemitah. In Parshat Mishpatim it says Shana Shvit Tishmatena Untashta, so Tishmatena. But both in Parshat Mishpatim and in Re'eh it's called Shemitah or Tishmatena, whereas in Parshat Bahar it's not called Shabbat Lashem. But this is the first time that we actually have the mitzvah that Shemitah doesn't just apply to not working the field, but it actually cancels debts. That is only from Parshat Re'eh, which is that we have the mitzvah to cancel debts. Now, the Sefer HaChinuch, based on the psukim we just read, if we go to source 2, the Sefer HaChinuch, there's lots of colors, so I might do a little bit of skipping just to make sure we cover the primary bits. So in source 2, the Sefer HaChinuch talks about there really is a positive and a negative part to this mitzvah. There's an aseh and a lo taseh, because on the one hand, we saw that the pasuk says shamot, you've got to cancel, but it also said lo yigos, you're not allowed to push, you're not allowed to press your fellow Jew to collect the debt once the time of Shemitah has passed. So in source 2, the Sefer HaChinuch says, "V'over al zeh," one who breaks and violates the command of Shemitah, "V'tava et chavero al chov she'avra alav shana shviyit," and claim from his friends a debt which, when the Shemitah year already passed, bisman habayit, at the time when the Beit HaMikdash was around, bitel aseh zeh. Firstly, they've broken an aseh, a positive command, milvad shehu over alav, in addition to a negative command. Kamoshen ichtov b'seder zeh b'gavot Hashem. So at the time of the Beit HaMikdash, it was de'oraita. Shmitat Ksafim was part and parcel from the psukim of the mitzvah of Shemitah, that the same way that you weren't allowed to work the field, there was also a mitzvah de'oraita to cancel your debts in the Shemitah year. Ubizman hazeh, nowadays, the ka'avid is Tzurba Shiur. Nowadays, it would only be an Issur D'Rabbanan, a rabbinical prohibition. V'im yadu habeidin shvi'it avra alav, and if the Beit Din actually knew that Shemitah had passed such a person's debts, einis kagilin gosot klal, they're not allowed to get involved in collecting debts. So even nowadays, he says, even though nowadays Shmitat Ksafim, cancelling debts in Shemitah, is only rabbinic, but we also paskin shibuda d'oraita, right? In Bata Batra and other places in the Gemara, they talk about what's called a shibud. When you have a loan, so it creates a shibud on the loan, a lien on the loan, and as a result, that all your property is meshuabad, is mortgaged to your debt. Now that's d'oraita. We paskin as machok at the end of Bata Batra, but we paskin shibuda d'oraita. Now, if Shemitah nowadays, Shemitah is only d'Rabbanan, and shibuda is d'oraita, so the question is, why is it that we cancel loans? If their lien is strong, why should the rabbinic requirement of Shemitah, how are they able to uproot the d'oraita shi'abud? So the Sefer HaChinuch answers, ha'ifsaka halacha, because the halacha has already been ruled, the b'kol davar sheba mamon yesh koach be'er chachamim lidchok davar Torah. Right? Any monetary matter, Chazal have the power to uproot. B'tam de hefker beit din hefker. Right? We know the halachic principle, hefker beit din hefker. Anything which is ownerless, the beit din can basically move money around, and therefore, even though mid'oraita there's a shibud, there's a lien, midrabanan they can say we've created a rabbinic status of Shemitah, and therefore nowadays without Yovel, where Shemitah is d'Rabbanan, nonetheless we rule that Shemitah Ksafim still applies, albeit midrabanan. Okay, if we go over the page, we'll see that this is discussed in the Gemara in Gittin. We learn all about Pruzbul from this basically 1 or 2 dapim in Sechet Gittin, which talk about Pruzbul. That's where Hillel, based on Mishnah, the Hillel brings all the discussions there of Pruzbul in source 3. And
so if there's a bank, you got a bank, they're not practicing this.
Well,
this preservation.
Well, the question is who. That's what. There's a question we'll discuss. If time allows, we'll get to bank. We'll get to bank accounts and savings accounts. Yes. In short, the bottom line, just in case we run out of time, it's machloket, and the consensus is you should sign on a principal. So if you have an Israeli bank account, you should sign a principal to make sure that you don't have to give up your savings accounts, whatever it is in Israel. So, and there's a similar discussion, what hopefully we'll get to, about checks. If it's somebody you haven't what's it called, bank to cash the check, they're from another Jew, then it might have a status of halva'ah, of a loan, and that you're not allowed to bank it. You have to go to them and say, do you mind if I bank it? Mishametani, I release your, and they say afal pichen, and only then you bank it.
That's on the price on the individual in response to the
Yes.
situation. But in legal practicalities, is there any application today?
Well, if
I'm saying in the context of a financial structure.
well, I mean, if you are a company where you were lending people money, and you were a religious Jew and you were lending to Jews, you would have an obligation to sign a principal to ensure, or not obligation, advised to sign a principal. Otherwise, when they come to pay you back after Shemitah, you'd be halachically obligated to say mishamet, I waive it, and only if they said afal pichen, even so, would you be allowed to accept it.
Is the way you reject lien.
existing previous debt as opposed to looking. It doesn't simply continue going forward. So it's basically what have you currently got, as opposed to you can't enter into an agreement knowing that it's a physical or it's a shooting year that you'd be exempt from it.
Can you, so the Gemara Makot discusses your question. I don't think we're going to discuss it in the share, but it's one of the opening Sugyo in Sechet Makot about if you say Almanat Shalotish Mateni Shviit, I lend to you on condition that the Shemitah year doesn't cancel. As a Makot between Rav and Shmuel, if I remember correctly. But we say it depends. It depends if you say Shalotish Mateni Shviit, that objectively Shemitah doesn't cancel me, or Almanat Shalotish Mateni Bashviit, which means it's a subjective thing. It's a machloket, but it's the sugya matneh al mashim Torah. But typically, we doesn't really help us. Yes. So we're also going to discuss that as well. That's why we've got to sign principles. So I already got the text prepared for Rav Ramon, and we'll do it on Sunday, Bezrat Hashem, after Shacharit.
You know, all my creditors.
Sorry for all your creditors. My Israeli bank account. All right. Okay. So let's have a look at the Gemara in Gittin in source 3. This is really the primary sugya which discusses the whole idea of Shemitah Ksafim and principle in source 3. So okay. So Amar Abai says Abai, Bashvit Bisman Hazeh. So we know that nowadays, Shemitah is only rabbinic, and this is based on the sugya in Gittin. Bashvit Bisman Hazeh, Shvit nowadays. So Rebbe, according to the opinion of Rebbe, the Tanya, where we learn in the Breita, Rebbe says, Bezed Dvar HaShemitah Shamot. Rebbe is Doresh Darshans the fact that it uses the root Shemitah twice. Shemitah Shamot, and this might sound familiar for those who came to the lunch and learn when we did Shemitah. V'shtei Shemitah Takatov Medaber, 2 Shemitahs. Echad Shemitah Karka, v'echad Shemitah Ksafim, right? Shemitah of the land and of money. Bizman she'tama shamet karka, atama shamet ksafim. Bizman she'ia tama shamet karka, ia tama shamet ksafim. V'takini Rabbanan de tishmat or de tishamet zechel shviyit. So, in other words, nowadays that we Shemitah Karka is rabbinic, so Shemitah Ksafim is also rabbinic. And therefore one is dependent on the other. Okay. What page are we on? Just for, okay, yeah. Okay. So can't see. Okay. So get the comfy chair. Okay. All right. So all right. So we largely rule like Rebbe. I'm just skip over source 4 just due to time. But we largely rule like Rebbe, and we saw that we had a serious discussion about the nature of Shemitah Bisman Hazeh, and those who want, I can give you the lunch and learn after Korah again. But nowadays Shemitah in general, the consensus is Shemitah nowadays is rabbinic because we don't have Yovel. The Yerushalmi discussed that it's dependent on Yovel, and we don't have the Yovel. Why don't we have Yovel? Because we don't have Rosh Hashanah, we don't have Sanhedrin to count the Yovel, and even if we knew when the count was, without Sanhedrin to officially count, it wouldn't help. And therefore, the consensus of the Rashba and probably the Rambam as well, and many others, is that Shemitah Bisman Hazeh Rabbanan. There are a couple like the Ramban who held that Shemitah nowadays is D'oraita, but the Shulchan Aruch doesn't seem to rule that way, and nor is that Minhag Yisrael largely. And therefore, the consensus is that Shemitah nowadays is D'Rabbanan. If Shemitah nowadays is D'Rabbanan, that also means Shemitah Ksafim is also D'Rabbanan as well. And therefore, the Rashba deals with this in source 5. So in one of his Chuvot, the Shuta Rashba in source 5, She'ela, Shalta. So you asked, says the Rambam, says the Rashba. Kaimalan, right? We paskin, the ain Shemitah Ksafim no heget bisman hazeh d'oraita, right? We don't follow Shemitah biblically, only rabbinically. So what do we do? So Tshuva says the Rashba, Kan uvachol galilotenu Shemitah Ksafim no heget. Here and in the entire area, entire region, we still have Shemitah Ksafim. And that's what the Gaon wrote. But Rav Al-Fasi Zal, right, the Rif, he writes, Katav, he wrote B'halachot, Kol HaTasugesh B'perek HaSholech, V'chein Pasak Rashi Zal B'perek Kamad Avod Zar B'shmaita, V'yesh Lem Harbe Al Mashi Yismofu. And they have what to rely on. The idea that they hold of, even in the diaspora, Shemitah Ksafim, which is your question, Dubi. The Harabanan, the Beir of Ashi, V'Rabba V'Abai, the Chulu B'chutz La'aretz Hayu Mishamtin, V'Bizman Hazeh Havu. So he brings a string of Rabbanim, right, in the Gemara, of Ashi, Rabbah, Abai, they all lived in Bavel, right, post Churban, and they were all practicing and discussing the sugya of Shemitah and Shemitah Ksafim. So we see that even post Churban, when Shemitah is Rabbanan, still Shemitah Ksafim applies in Chutz La'aretz. Now the question is why? Shmita applies, Shmita Hakarka applies obviously only in Eretz Israel. So why does Shmita Ksafim apply in Chutz La'aretz?
Not necessarily. It's not necessarily just the art, not tied to
Oh.
the land.
Right. It's not dependent on the land, right? As I said, remember when we look at even Pshuto Shel Mikra, we have two models. We have Parshat Re'eh, right? V'zeh Dvar HaShmita Shamot Kol Baal Mashe Yado. That's a very different model to which is a model what we call in Briska Lomdus on the Gavra, on the individual, right? Kol Mashe Yado is on the individual, is very different to the model presented in Parshat Bahar, V'shavta Haaretz Shabbat Lashem, right? Shabbat Haaretz only applies to the Aretz, but the chova, the obligation of V'zeh Dvar HaShmita Shamot. This is the matter of Shemitah. You've got to shamot, you've got to release. Kol Baal Mashe Yado, anyone who has any sort of loan owed to him, that is not dependent on any location. It's not a mitzvah to Yabaret, and therefore it would apply everywhere. And therefore, if Shemitah in Eretz Yisrael is Drabanan, then Shemitah Ksafim around the world will also apply, but be Drabanan. And he brings it B'chem Mefurish B'Yerushalmi, second paragraph. This is explicit in the Yerushalmi, the Rasina B'Yerushalmi, as we learned there. Taman Amrin, then they say, Afilu commander Ama Masrot Midivrei Torah, even one who holds that master nowadays is deraita, Moda they agree, B'Shmita Shima Divreihem. Shmita nowadays is only rabbinic. The Tanya, as we learn in the pasuk, V'zeh Dvar HaShmita Shamot. Rebbe Omer, Rebbe says, as we saw in that Gemara in Gittin, Shnei Shmitin, Shmita v'Yovel. This is a slightly different version of the Gemara. We have the Rishalmi does it, not that Shmita Ksafim and Shmita Karka, but Shmita and Yovel. And I also quoted that in the Lunch and Learn Bismanot. Lots of retroactive plugs here for the Lunch and Learn. Okay. Rebbe Omer, Shnei Shmitim, Shnei Sheva Yovel, Bisman Shah Yovel Noheg, Shmita Noheget, Midivrei Torah. Pasku HaYovelot, once the Yovel stops, Shmita Noheget Midivreihem. Shmita is only rabbinic. But the Manu On Mekan says the Rashba we learn from here further, the Af Bisman She'ein HaYovel Noheg Klal, Shmita Noheget Midivreihem. So Shmita nowadays is still rabbinic. B'chol Shmita Noheg Ba'aretz Midivreihem. If it's a rabbinic Shmita in Eretz Yisrael, Memei Leshamim the Shmita Ksafim Noheget B'chol HaMakom Midivreihem. So the status, the level of the obligation of Shemitah is dependent on what's going on in Eretz Yisrael. But it still applies across the entire diaspora. And therefore, if there's Shemitah in Eretz Yisrael, the Rabbanan, there's Shemitah Ksafim in the whole world, the Rabbanan. The Meiri says similarly in source 6 that it all works according to Rebbe, and therefore nowadays the Shemitah Ksafim mid Rabbanan across diaspora as well. Source 6, we won't read it inside now. The Rambam is the one who writes basically black and white that this applies unequivocally in Eretz Yisrael nowadays in his Hilchot Shemitah, in not just in Eretz Yisrael but also in the diaspora in source 7. So let's see that the Rambam inside is the Hilchot Shemitah v'Yovel of the Rambam, Perek Tet in source 7. Says the Rambam, Ein Shemitah Ksafim noheget min Torah ela bisman shehal Yovel noheg. So he says Shemitah Ksafim only applies biblically when the Yovel is around. Sheyesh sham Shemitah Karka, because it's dependent on actually the releasing of the land. Shahare Yashuva Karka Levalav Belo Kesef, the land goes back. V'davazer Kabalahi, that's a Masor, tradition. Amru Chachamim, the rabbi said, Bisman she'atam Shmit Karka, atam Shmit Ksafim, b'chol makom. Whenever the Shmit Karka, the Shmit Ksafim in the entire world. Bein ba'aretz, bein b'chutz haaretz. Bisman she'ein sham Shmit Karka, ein atam Shmit Ksafim b'shviit afilu ba'aretz. But if there is, there's no Shemitah, then there's no Shemitah Ksafim anywhere in the world. Halacha Gimel, u'medivrei sofrim, according to the rabbis, they decree rabbinically shetahei Shemitah Ksafim noheget bizman hazeh b'chol makom. So it's a Rabbanan that Shemitah should exist nowadays everywhere. V'af al pi she'ein hayovel noheg, even without Yovel, kadei shelo tishtakach Torah Shemitah Ksafim Yisrael. So it is a zeicher, if you like, zeicher la mitzvah d'oraita shel Shemitah. That it is dependent on it, but the same way that they enacted a Shemitah in Eretz Yisrael with Rabbanan, they also enacted at exactly the same time, says the Rambam, a Shemitah Ksafim for the entire world.
Sorry to slow things down, but why after the full resolution, that was the end?
By it Shani. There's a question, well, of Yovel by it Rishon. It's the last time they did it Midoraita.
So but it wasn't hard to keep the count. We're only talking 70 years, and they were back, 47 years later.
So the sorry.
Majority.
So there wasn't Rov Yosh.
That's for sure.
So one of the requirements is it's got to have However, Yoshvei Aleh, all of the inhabitants of the Jewish people have to be there. So there's a machloket how you understand Yoshvei Aleh. Some people say Rov, some people say you've got to have each of the Shvatim there. Some people say you've got to have the Sanhedrin, which represents everyone. So no, the Lashon is Kol Yoshvei Aleh, huh? So the question is, what does Kol mean? So some people say Ruba Kukulo, some people say it means you have to have representation of each tribe, which we lost after Bayit Rishon. But the majority of Jews definitely weren't there. So, and definitely didn't have all the tribes either. So
then Midoraita Yovel would have stopped even long time before Churban Bayit
100
Rishon,
and whatever years before,
when the northern kingdom was destroyed, was
yes,
kept.
so it would seem. There's a question. There's a question about that.
And now, when we talk about useless employers for Arabs in relation to the majority of Jews living back in Israel.
So there's questions of now if
But
maybe it might be for things like Trumot and Masrot. We might be moving towards a D'oraita, but without Sanhedrin, according to the Ramban and others, then you can't bring back Yovel, even if we had all the other criteria. So you could have a case where Trumot and Masrot might be D'oraita, but that's not dependent on Yovel. That's I think Sasitz Eliezer ruled that way, whereas other things are not D'oraita until you have Yovel. So Shemitah won't be D'oraita, which is why we're Heter Mechira is not so bad, right? And better than other solutions which involve ruining the Israeli economy. That's my Zionist stint for the evening. Okay, all right. Okay, good. We're Zionist here. All right. Okay, let's move on. Okay, so Ramban. Yes, Ramban. Okay, so let's have a look at the Ramban. So before we see the Ramban, so there was an opinion in the Rishonim. I think it's the Ravid. They quote it here. I think. Did they bring it? Oh, there we go. They brought him in. Excellent. Okay, they don't bring him inside that, right? But sorry, right. The Ravid said that all of Shemitah nowadays is a midat chasidut. Strictly speaking, we don't rule like that. Meant Shemitah in general, and also Shemitah Ksafim as well. So mincha chasidut, but not according to the letter of the law. But that's not how we rule. So they bring the Ramban here who quotes this in source 8. So Ramban. But nowadays, there's no bait in to sanctify the Yovel. The ain tokin, they don't blow the shofar in Yovel. The ain mishalchin avadim, right? They don't release slaves. Ain Yovel neheklal, there's no Yovel. These things require Yovel. The kivan shebatal hayovel bitul gamur, since there is absolutely no Yovel today, the Eino Noheg Afilu Midivrehem, isn't even a rabbinic Yovel. Afa Shmita Eino Noheg Klal Afilu Midivrehem. So this is not the Ramban himself. This is the Ramban quoting the Ravid. That Shmita doesn't apply. The Ramban himself held Shmita nowadays is D'oraita. So that's what happens when you read half a piece. You've got to be careful. This is the Ramban quoting the Ravid. That according to the Ravid, Shmita nowadays isn't even rabbinic. Loba avodat karka v'loba hashmatak safim. Neither the land nor the shmitter of monies. Right? And we know the Ramban disagreed, and he went the other extreme. He said shmitter nowadays is D'oraita. But ultimately, the psak is to look at shmitter nowadays Drabanan, and therefore shmitter ksafim in Chutz La'aretz as Drabanan. Sorry, keeps going, but midrabanan. Right? The Alkut Yosef summarizes things.
What's the basis for Ramban's position?
Ramban. That was all according to the opinion of Rebbe in the Gemara in Gittin Lamed Vav Lamed Zayin. And so there's two ways to read that. You can say that by the fact that only Rebbe said it, everyone agreed. Or the fact that only Rebbe said it, that was Divrei Rebbe, but the Chachamim disagreed with Rebbe. So two schools of thought in the Rishonim as to how to understand that this is the opinion of Rebbe. Because it's all based on Rebbe. And the question is Rebbe representing, or is Rebbe the Dat Yachid? That's the machloket, is understanding whether, and even if it is, do we follow Rebbe against the Chachamim? So there's two svekot there, because even if others disagreed, maybe the fact that the Bavli doesn't bring anyone, explicitly. So maybe clearly they only brought Rebbe. They wanted us to follow Rebbe. That's the argument of the Rashba and others, and that's the consensus. So let's see how the Rabbi Yitzchak Yosef here in source 9 summarizes things. He says, so there's no biblical shmitah of monies without the yovel. Because then the karka would also go back without any money. Again, they're basing it on what? what was Yovel? Yovel was like a massive Shemitah, right? Shemitah on steroids, because then the land would go back. Land which you bought or borrowed for 50 years would then go back. So that's essentially what we're doing with Shemitah Ksafim. Money you lent me, in the end, you don't have to give it back. So in some sense, it's kind of like the same sort of idea that money would go back to the original owners without payment. It's some sort of basically like resetting, basically, of society. And that's essentially what Shemitah Ksafim is, and Yovel even more so. So without Yovel, there's no D'oraita Shemitah
What was
Ksafim.
the practical situation in the 49th year and the 50th year? And then the Shemitah, and then Yovel.
So you mean there? So loans went in Shemitah, land went back in Yovel. It was a serious free, like for everything went back, serious reset.
The price of land was relative to how many years they had. I think I knew that.
Fi, how's it go? Fi Rav Hashanim Tarbel, Fi Ma'ot Hashanim Tamit. Right, that they would sell it because you knew you only had to field for however many years until Yovel. So the price would be according.
But how many of those did you experience?
Sorry, whatever it is.
How many of those did you experience?
They say 70 because there's the midrash that says 70, or they kept 70 that they didn't keep. To
Correct, meaning arguably they never, according to that, they never kept one.
sorry, 70. What 70 times 50? You
As
did
in the galut between Bayit Rishon and Bayit Sheni of 70 years.
well 70.
No, it was 70 Shmitot, not 70
70
Yovel.
Shmitot. Thank you. Very good. 70 Shmitot.
That they failed to keep properly. No?
Sorry.
It was not 70 Shmitot, but they failed to keep properly.
Yes, 70 Shmitot they failed to
And
keep
as
properly.
a punishment for
Well,
that,
we know they were in Eretz Israel for about 800 years, all in all. So the first time round.
Right.
So go figure.
Okay.
So there's also machloket between the Chachamim and Rabbi Yehuda about if Yovel year is year 50 and then that resets and then you start again 51, 52 and then 57, or Yovel year is also year 1 of the Shemitah, in which case it's 56. There's a big machloket there. So, but you're right. Thank you, Peter. It was 70 Yovel years. I was beginning to try and work out the maths. 70 Shemitah years. Thank you.
Yeah,
Twice.
well, no.
Otherwise, there'll be since before the creation. Right. Okay. All right. Okay. So let's see. So just continuing the Yalkut Yosef there, line 3, Shneimar, as it says, V'zeh Devrah Shemitah Shamot, V'zman she'tam shamet karkaot, atam shamet ksafim. When you have Shemitah of the land, you have of the money. V'zman she'eina tam shamet karkaot, eina tam shamet ksafim. But when there's no land, the writer, there's no Shemitah ksafim. V'zman hazeh, second paragraph, V'zman hazeh, and nowadays, ein hayovel noheg, as we know, there is no yovel. Shaharei ne'emar, as it says, Ukratem dror ba'aretz l'chol yoshver, you should, proclaim a dror of freedom for all its inhabitants. So there you go, Jeremy. Shekol yoshver aleh. So we learn kol yoshver, right, from the pasuk, l'chol yoshveha in Parshat Bahar. And the question is, what does kol mean? V'hol v'zman hazeh ein kol yisranim b'Eretz Israel, and since nowadays not all of the Jews are in Israel yet, ein hayovel noheg. So we don't have yovel. But kiven she'ein hayovel noheg, and once we don't have yovel, ein shmita ksafim nohegim min Torah. There's no biblical shmita ksafim. But nonetheless, Shmita Ksafim Noheget is Manazem and Divrei Sofrim. It does apply rabbinically. Shmita Ksafim Noheget Gam B'chutz La'aretz. So that's the bottom line based on the sugyot that we've seen. When does this happen? So we're at the end of the year, so we better hope it's the end of the year. But there's actually a machloket in the Rishonim as to exactly when it happens. The pasuk in Re'eh says Mekates Sheva Shanim, at the end of 7 years. And the Pashtut, the understanding is it means at the end of the 7th year, in the 7 years. And this would seem to be what the Gemara in Erechin is saying, in source 10. Amar Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak, Tanya, we learn in the Braita, Nimtzeta Taomer, Echad Yovel, the Echad Shvi'it, Meshamtin Ke'echad. Right, Danny would ask before, what would happen when years 49 and 50? It must be an absolute balagan for, the Tabu or forever trying to work out what is going on. Because both Yovel and Shemitah would happen ke'echad at one point. Ela sheha Yovel b'tchilato v'Shmitah b'sofa, but rather that Yovel is at the beginning and Shemitah is at the end. What does it mean? Ela, but Adarabba, on the contrary, says the Gemara, Mishum hachi havai. It's due to that reason that it was ke'echad at one point, because the end of the 7th year, all the monies would go, cancelled, and then at the beginning of the 50th year, so the end of the 49th year, all the monies would go back, and then a minute later, right, then all the lands would go back. So mishum hachi havai, dafka, because they happened at the same moment. So Ema, I might say mipnei shehayovel. So we amend the Gemara and we say mipnei shehayovel, because it happens. to which the Gemara says, Bishlam Shviit B'Sofa Dichte B'Kate Sheva Shanim. It's all very well that Shemitah is Mishametet at the end of the year because it says in the pasuk Mikates at the end of 7 years. But how do we know that Yovel is at the beginning rather than the end? And that's what the Gemara deals with. But by the by, what do we see from there? That the Gemara seems to imply it's at the end. Shviit B'Sofa, it's at the end. And that's why we can sign a prusbul until Shkia Rosh Hashanah time. In order to withhold, and we'll discuss prusbul in a minute, but we'll withhold, prevent the loans all being cancelled. But the Gemara is quite clear that that's how it understands the case to be the end of the seventh. That's largely accepted. Ibn Ezra says, according to Pshutel Shal Mikra, Ibn Ezra was never shy about giving pshat, which went directly against Chazal, even when that went against halacha and explicit Gemarot. So Ibn Ezra in his Perush it understands mikates to mean at the beginning of the end, the beginning of the end, because it says mikates sheva shanim at the end of 7 years. So he says that means the beginning of the last of the 7th years. So in source 11, Ibn Ezra says, "V'tam mikates sheva shanim tasashmita b'tchilat hashana." Gasher pirashti. Like v'ha'ed, and what's the proof? Hakel at ha'am. Also the mitzvah of hakel in next week's parsha. Right, we have the mitzvah of hakel. It talks about mikates at the end, and he, according to him, it also means you do hakel in the 7th year. We don't paskin that way, so the proof isn't very good. But halacha l'maisa. But we according to us, hakel was when they would all gather together to read the Torah at Sukkot after Shemitah. So this coming Sukkot, they'll do a zeicher lahakel at the kotel, and they'll have whoever read, or the president or chief rabbi read from the Torah. Sorry? We should do Zeichel HaHakel? Sorry?
Tidying the kids. Right. When do we?
Ha'anashim v'hanashim v'ataf.
When is it? The end of Sukkot.
In Chol HaMoed. We'll do it any day Chol HaMoed. It's all Zeichel.
No,
Yeah.
I know.
Do it on the
But
Thursday when they do the
was
families.
that done? It's the end of Sukkot, no?
No, it was in Chol HaMoed, I think, or first or second day after that clap. I have to check. But it was, I think, I was during Chol HaMoed or first day. It wasn't Simchat Torah. I have to look it up. Nowadays they do it just on Chol HaMoed. They don't do it like on Yom Tov because then more people can come. I have to check when they did it precisely. Sorry? Sorry, we could. You're saying, is there a connection? But Simcha Beit HaSheva was every year. And throughout, this was a one-time event. So it happened once. So, but the idea was to have the Hanashim, V'Taf, they all gather together to read the Torah and to learn Torah. Okay, duly noted. Okay. Sorry, what, to learn Torah?
Gather everyone together.
Gather everyone together?
That's good.
Okay. Moving on. Moving on very swiftly. Okay. So according to the Pshat, it would seem that Ibn Ezra is just going against, and we know that Ibn Ezra often goes against based on what he thinks is Pshat Mikra. But there's the opinion, they didn't bring it here, which is a shame they didn't bring it in the sources. They referenced it, I think, on the footnotes, but the opinion of the Rosh actually held similar to the Ibn Ezra. He said that Shemitah cancels the debts at the end of Shemitah year, but the prohibition of lo yigos, you're not allowed to push people to collect your debts, already starts at the beginning of Shemitah year. According to the Rosh, you have to sign a prusbul before Rosh Hashanah last year. Some people are machmir, they sign 2 prusbuls. They sign a prusbul before the end of the 6th year, and then I wasn't here last year, so but they sign at the end of the 6th year, but the Me'ikar Hadin is now, and that's all Shulchan Aruch rules. But the Rosh held that the prohibition of lo yigos already starts, so you've got to sign both, according to the Rosh. Because the Rosh's whole beauty of it is saying the whole idea of Shemitah is that everything belongs to Hashem. So already in Shemitah, according to the Rosh, you shouldn't be allowed to collect the debts from other people, right? Because it's already Shemitah. So how can the whole idea is V'shavta ha'aretz Shabbat Hashem, it's all wonderful. So you're telling me, and according to the Shulchan Aruch, which is how we rule, you're doing the opposite. You're trying to, get all your loans, collected as quickly as possible before Shemitah. Says the Rosh, the Shemitah year itself, you've got to, relax on and not have that, and that's the Rosh's ruling.
Well, I just find the first one, and the first one includes the second one.
because there's two stages according to the Rosh. There's the prohibition of lo yigos kicks in at the beginning of Shemitah, but then the prohibition, the actual reality of the loans cancelling themselves happen at the end. We have to do both because we don't actually rule out the Rosh, so you can't be machmir for the Rosh. I didn't look at source 12. Let's just read the opening line of source 12. The Rambam and all the Rishonim disagree with the Rosh. In source 12, Ein shviat mishametik safim ela b'sofa. Right, that Shemitah cancels everything at the end. It says Mekate Sheva Shanim at the end of 7 years. Taseh Shemitah v'zed v'ashmitah. V'sham hu Omer, and there it says Mekate Sheva Shanim b'moed shnat Shemitah b'chag Sukkot. Ma sham achar Sheva, just like in Hakel, it's after the 7th year, i.e. Sukkot in the 8th year. Af hashmatak safim achar Sheva. Lefikach, therefore, hilva et chavero b'shviat atzma. If you lend your friend in Shemitah itself, go ve'chovo kol hashana. You can collect it all year. But when this coming Rosh Hashanah, the sun sets, it's lost. And ultimately, that's the way we rule. There's no prohibition of lo yigos until the end. But the Rosh himself disagreed. Okay, that's essentially how we understand. But on the time, we're going to skip the red bars because I want to get to some of the more lemaisa things. Otherwise, we have to do another shiur online or something before Rosh Hashanah. Okay. So yeah, just to look at source 14, this is how the Shulchan Aruch rules. Not like the Rosh, but in line with most Rishonim in source 14. Why is it in Choshen Mishpat? Because the Shulchan Aruch doesn't speak about the karka. He only speaks about Shemitah Ksafim because he doesn't deal with Hilchot the Mashiach, what's known as halachot to do with Eretz Yisrael. So in source 14, says the Shulchan Aruch, Ein shviat mishametet ksafim ela b'sofa. Shemitah only is at the end of the year that it cancels. So therefore, hal malvet chaver b'shviat atzma. If you lend someone in the Shemitah year itself, gova kol shana b'beita, then you're allowed to collect it all year. But when the sun sets on Rosh Hashanah, shel motzei shviat of the 8th year, avad achov, then it's lost. And that ultimately is how we rule that this is when the time is that the loans are going to be cancelled, and only now does the prohibition kick in. Okay, the question is, when exactly do we say that Shemitah Ksafim, which loans essentially included? This is the halachic question that we've got to discuss now. So the Gemara in Makot already discusses it. I alluded to it before, Michael, based on your question about certain conditions that you can stipulate that it doesn't cancel to make the ideal principle redundant. But the Gemara itself discusses in Makot, in source 15, the beginning of Makot, Daf Gimel Amud Bet, source 15, what loans are cancelled by Shemitah. And what about if I have a loan, which from the outset I tell you to pay me back well after Shemitah? Okay, so let's look at source 15. Ikeda Amri. So those are saying, Amar Rav Yehuda, Amar Shmuel, says Rav Yehuda the name of Shmuel, Hamalvet Chavero le'eser shanim. Somebody lends their friend money for 10 years. Ein shviat mishamatto. Even though he's going to have to eventually go over lo yigos and press him to get the money back. When it hits the time of Shemitah, the lo yigos doesn't apply. Seeing as the deadline is only, let's say it's Motzei Shemitah now. So when I lent him the money, so even the deadline is going to be 3 years after Shemitah. So Motzei Shemitah, lo yigos doesn't apply because I can't go to him and press him for the money because legally he doesn't have to give it back to me for another 3 years. And therefore, since lo yigos doesn't apply at the moment of Motzei Shemitah, there's no issue of lo yigos, and therefore somebody who loans lahaba for well beyond Shemitah, then there would be no need for a solution like principle because there will be no cancelling of the debt in such a case. That's how Tosfot is saying that Rabbeinu Tam Paskins like this statement of Shmuel in source 16 say Tosfot Ikeda Amri is there as it say Omer Rabbeinu Tam the halacha kalishna batra. This is the ruling, like the second phrase of the Gemara. There were two versions, but this is how we paskin. The hachi nami matnitim b'sayele kasha lishtakama v'zhar tagir Rabbeinu Tam. And Rabbeinu Tam also says in the Hazharot, right? It was one of the poems that he wrote on Shavuos, I believe. Zman asar ki alvenu v'lo b'mishpat b'chatzi yamav ya'azvenu. Right. So if you loan for a period of eser, then it's when you lend lo b'mishpat b'chatzi yamav ya'azvenu. So Rabbeinu Tam turned it into a poem for Shavuot. Not for now, but it's fascinating. So many of our Zmirot and things that we have in our Piyutim are just simply like, Hilchot Shabbat or Hilchot Yom Tov, whatever it is, or Hilchot, Ksafim. Like, if you think about the words of Ki Eshmar Shabbat, it's just like Hilchot Shabbat, but put into a song. So like, Mechel Malacha Bo Sofo Lahachrit. If you break Shabbat, you chayav karet. We're all singing there at the table. Mechel Malacha Bo Sofo Lahachrit. It's like, you think about what you're saying. But it's, so that's what the Rishonim like to do. They like to turn halacha into songs. But okay. So let's have a look in the Rambam here in the next source 17. That the Rambam and the Shulchan Aruch in his wake also ruled this way. Says the Rambam in source 17. Hamalvet chavera v'kava lo zman le'esr shanim. Somebody loans their friend for 10 years. Eino mishamet. Shmita doesn't cancel it. Afal pishu ba lidei lo yigos. Even though he eventually will have to, it would seem that eventually the prohibition of not pushing him to pay him back will apply. Harehu ata eino yachol ingos. But when the moment when push comes to shove of motzei shmita, it's not relevant yet, and therefore it's okay. What about your case, though, Michael? Hitna ima shaloyit ba'enu. What if you stipulate not you'll pay me back after 10 years, but you'll pay me back after 7 years, but shmita should not cancel it? It doesn't work. Shviat mishametet. Nonetheless, it's still cancelled by shmita if you stipulate that he will not demand payment. So trying to make these sort of stipulations doesn't typically help, but a long-term loan would be okay. What about a loan where there is no clear due date?
What if they say?
That's the next question we'll address.
What if they say it's going to end in 10 years, and then they say Shmita won't affect the loan? Presumably, they're saying the loan in 10 years means it's fine. And
Presumably, you're saying they put the two together?
Yeah, you put it together, just like the Shmita stipulation will just be effectively erased. Like it has no force.
Right, but it wouldn't matter because even if Shmita is mishametet, it already had no force from the fact that it was a 10-year loan.
I think the Isur including.
Even though the point of the second statement of the Rambam was just simply that you cannot override it with your own stipulation. But if the mitziut, the reality is that it didn't apply, then it didn't apply. So it doesn't matter what you say. Okay, so we'll skip down to source 19, the Shulchan Aruch. What happens if you don't give a due date? So we have a general klal in halacha when it comes to loans. The stam halva ashloshim yom. The default loan is for 30 days. So if there's no payback date given, stam halva ashloshim yom, which means that strictly speaking, based on everything we just learned, that if somebody just has a loan and whether it just or checks or whatever it is in their pocket, but nothing with a deadline, then you could already sign a prusbul from Rosh Chodesh Elul, because that is 30 days. Because any loan, unless there's a loan which they have to pay you back before Shemitah, if there's no deadline, it's going to be after Shemitah. The reason we like to do it as close to Shemitah as possible is because of other monies and things which do accumulate in a bank account, things like that, where it's not so clear that it's a halva al shloshim yom, because the idea of a bank account or savings account is that I should be able to have access to it immediately, and therefore that is like a halva apachot mishloshim yom, and therefore because of savings and things, we like to sign it if possible erev Rosh Hashanah or as close as possible if you have like an Israeli bank account or something for those things which will accumulate in the interim period. But strictly speaking, for actual loans from Rosh Chodesh Elul, you can sign, because unless you're going to someone's going to lend you money with a short payback period, which is going to be before Rosh Hashanah, stam halva ashloshim yom.
But what if you give the loan on, say, no due date? So stam.
Al pi halacha, then it's due back 3 days after Rosh Hashanah. In which case, Shemitah is not mishametet, because at the moment.
Correct. It's not. So why would it be possible?
So in that case, sorry, no, but it's for like any other loans that you have, that would be that.
That would fall due.
That would fall due before, yeah. Meaning loans you've already loaned out.
Yeah.
It only principle only covers what you've done until that point. Right. So it would help you for previous loans, but it wouldn't help you for the new loans. But you would need it for any new loans. But you would for, let's say, savings account, because the whole premise of savings account is that it's like a halva'ah miyadit. You expect, that you can have the money immediately. And therefore, you want that to be covered to the last day. Okay. So let's just see this inside that. There's halacha in source 19, the Shulchan Aruch. Hamalvet chaveru stam. somebody who just lends their friend without stipulating. V'lo kavalos man doesn't give a fixed time. But makom she'ein lehem minhag. There's no custom. Yesh lo zman shloshim yom. The default is 30 days. She'ein yachol tov al kodem. You can't claim it prior to this. Bein b'malva b'shtar, bein b'malva al peh. Whether it's with a document or it's an oral loan. Bein b'mashkon, bein b'lo mashkon. Whether you take a collateral or not. V'im hitna she'yitba kozman she'yitzeh. Yesh lo l'tova afilu b'yom. So that's like bank accounts. If you stipulate that you can claim it whenever you want, then even on the same day you can collect it. Aval sha'al astam. But if you just borrow, zman la'alta, then it's immediate. V'yachol l'tova. We have to collect it immediately. So when it comes to hilchot she'ilah, borrowing, then we don't say stam she'ilah l'shloshim yom. Only stam halva'ah l'shloshim yom. Alone, we say there's a grace period of 30 days. When it comes to borrowing, there's man hachzara, the time to give back something you've borrowed, is within 30 days. It's not within 30 days, but it's immediate. By the way, another important thing, which might be why you'd sign it beyond Elul, besides for a bank account or something in the interim, Shmita Ksafim doesn't just apply to money. It applies to anything you lend somebody. So if you lend, your neighbor, also, an onion, right, and you're expecting them to give it back to you, then Shmita also cancels that, quite possibly, if it's done in that manner. It's not, there's la dafka money. It's anything that you lend from one to another.
So in most circumstances where there's a commercial loan, not bank deposit, but a commercial loan between two views, and you've got around the other issues.
If the deadline is
if the deadline, if they're not in default essentially, right, and a deadline is set, then that's possibly not needed for that essentially. If
the collector has no right whatsoever to ask for it prior to Motzei Rosh Hashanah, basically, then yes, that particular loan would not require a passport.
That would apply to, not most, if not all loans.
Commercial stuff, but like as in standing into personal stuff,
It wouldn't, right?
Yeah.
Exactly. You should know that in Israel, so we laugh about, there's a big question about bank accounts in Israel. So Rav Eliashiv said you don't need to, but Minchas Yitzchak and others said you need to. It's like a loan. One of the ways that how they deal with interest issues in Israel is they sign a heter iska. And the way that heter iska functions is they turn it into what's called a chetzi halva, chetzi pikadon. It's a partial deposit and a partial loan. So halachically, you make your arrangement with the bank. It's a half loan. So by name, but not just by name, but by halacha, it's already a half loan. And therefore, there's a question about whether or not really that's considered a loan in terms of Shemitah. So we joke about, it's not really a loan, it's a deposit, it's my money, just the bank are looking after it for me. But the mechanism we use to avoid the interest issue is a heter iska, which by name and by halacha is partially a loan. So there's a question if a chetzi halva, chetzi pikadon requires Shemitah applies to it, or because of the pikadon side that retains it. And that's where some of the machloket comes from as well. There's a machloket in general in the Gemara about a milveh bishtar, whether this would apply to a written loan as well as just a verbal one. But ultimately, we paskin that it applies for both. There's a machloket here in the Rishonim about it. I'm just trying. We only got a few minutes left, so I just want to work out if I want. Maybe I'll skip this. 1 second, I just jumped back. What page are we on? 243. Second, okay. 242, 243. Okay. It's magic PDF jumping.
Is this 11? Book 11?
This is not. This is from they had a special one they released from the Shemitah book, right? So, but we'll be going back to 11.
They're making you on. Are they making you on?
They already made 12. Well, we're going to work on what we're going to do for book 12. Okay. So I'm just going to eye on the time. Okay. All right. Okay. Let's go back to what page is on 241. 242. Okay. So let's see it's 242 then. 242. That's where you are. Yeah. Shulchan Aruch. Okay. I just have got it. Okay. So at the top of page 242. Okay. So ultimately, we paskin that even it doesn't matter whether it's a written loan or if it's a verbal agreement that Shemitah would apply to it anyway. Source 22 says Shulchan Aruch, Shvi'it mishametet et hamilveh, Shvi'it cancels the debt. Afilu milveh shebishtar yesh bo achrayut nechasim. So we go all the way. We're machmir all the way, and we say that even a milveh, even if it's a milveh which is on a shtar, so it's documented, it's not just a ad hoc agreement, and there's achrayut. Like we know you can have a loan with achrayut and without achrayut. What's the difference? Well, one's definitely more fun for the lender because achrayut means that if I come to you and I say, okay, time's up, you've got to pay me, and you say, I can't pay you because I had a field but I sold it. I can go collect the field from the guy who bought it. So, and the idea is how you allowed to. That's not fair on the poor, the nebuch who bought the field. The answer is because a shtar has a kol. You say that a milveh b'shtar has a kol. Everyone knows everyone's business, right? And everyone knows that you have a documented money. Sorry?
That's a common law. It's a document as well.
Yes. What's it called?
That is no problem.
Right.
You know, stuff like when you sell property,
Ah.
you can reclaim property downstream.
Yeah, we can.
That's
There's
common law.
also something before that's current general.
Uh-huh. There you go. So just so you could understand the rationale of this. So that's actually civil law here?
Yeah.
Okay. There you go. So the idea, but the idea is that you know that the guy should have known that even a loan which is so still attached and there's achrayut and there's a shtar and it's an ironclad thing, even such a thing which is discussed in Rishonim is nonetheless cancelled out. Let's have a look at a couple of contemporary cases just to end off here. So we mentioned before that the case of a check, which they spelled here the American way. Ugh. All right, we'll have to get a an Aussie English version. Yeah, all right. Save money because check with a QUE is longer. But British, yeah. Well, right now it's all right.
No one uses checks in this country, so it doesn't matter.
I noticed that. All right. So okay. So checks. I haven't banked my check. I haven't cashed the check yet. So is Shemitah mishamet or not? So the Yalkut Yosef discusses this in source 23. In general, there's so much halachic discussion around checks. No, there is. What is a check? Is a check money, or is it a shtar, or is it what is it? Can I do a pidyon haben with a check? Can I be mekadosh a woman with a check? There's all sorts of questions about the nature of a check. Is it like legal tender? Check is considered, or I don't know if it's considered. So the poskim already discussed. Can you do with a note? Can you with a bank note? Can you do a pidyon haben with a bank note? Some of them say no, because even a bank note is just an agreement which says, how it is here. But I promise to pay the bearer the sum. It's a nice picture of the Queen. It literally says on the British banknotes, I promise to pay the bearer a sum of however much. So it's an agreement. It's a question about it. But Feinstein and others were lenient that checks have a status of money. In which case, when I've got a check, it's not an IOU, it's money, right?
My fucking track.
So
It's the worst.
There's no reference on the money.
it doesn't. So on the English note, it says, I promise to pay the bearer a sum of £5. So it actually is on the money. It's a promise that it's an official IOU. So there's a question about if a bank note is considered money itself. But wait till you even forget that. Even a stage further, check. What is the halachic status of a check? If I've got a check from you, does that mean that it's money, which I've got in my pocket? Or is the fact that you can cancel the check mean that you haven't really given it to me yet? It's an IOU, in which case Shemitah would cancel it. So Yalkut Yosef discusses that case in source 23. He says, Afilu im haloveh natan lamalveh lepiraon chavo check al cheshbon sheyesh lo b'bank. So even if he gives him, right, the borrower gives him, here, take the check. That cancels. Unless you've done a principal. Anything which is yet to be collected. That works. It would seem check bankai, even with a bank check, since it's not yet been collected. At the end of the day, rules of Yitzchak Yosef since the money itself has not gone through into my account, again, it counts a separate deal, but it's not gone through. As a result, the money is not yet mine. It's an IOU, or it's a contract, if you like, until I bank the check. It's not fully in my possession, and therefore it would not suffice. The Shemitah would cancel a check. So if you have any outstanding checks, might be good to write prison.
So I think there was a few bank check the money's in your account. That money is, unless it's specifically that dollar bill or that $100 bill, it's not your money. It's just a promise to give you the equivalent of that money into your account.
Into your hand.
Into your hand, sorry. So that unless I've given you a $100 note with your name written on it, it could be any $100 note. And therefore, you haven't actually made that on that money. It's only a promise to give you the equivalent of that money. So
you're saying that if you've got any note from anybody, that's essentially an IOU.
Yeah, and unless it's actually that specifically yours,
right?
Yes.
Interesting. I think that will probably come under the whole thing you said before about whether legally it's considered yours. Can I, do I have the ability to revoke? If I give you $10, do I have the ability to revoke that? I can cancel my check. You have to pay something like a fine or whatever, or whatever it is, a service charge. But I can cancel the check even though it's with you. I can't tell you, I'm sorry, can you please give my $10 back? Once it's yours, you tell me where to go, right?
Money. You're not deciding to accumulate on that, which is actually your piece of money, or
But I'm saying even if it says all these fancy things on it, ultimately I can't take from you $10. I can't say that $10. I changed my mind. I can do that with a check until you bank it, and that's the difference. Yeah, I agree. If it's perhaps legal tender in that sense, then yes, it would make a difference. Yes, agreed. Okay, I think we're more or less out of time. We didn't get to talk about, which I didn't photocopy for you, they didn't have so much here, which is just a general question about how Prusbul works. And let's just say a word about that before we end off. The Gemara in Gittin discusses that basically the whole idea of the Torah was to help out the ani, right? To help out the poor person. The whole idea of cancelling loans was to help poor people out. Hillel HaZaken in his time saw people, it got to year 6, they stopped lending people because then and this was a classic example where Hillel said that, listen, this is the intention of the Torah. It's actually having the opposite effect. And therefore, he instituted the Prusbul mechanism being where you sign over and you verbally say in front of the Beit Din 3 or their Eidim to the Beit Din HaGadol or whatever it is, where you essentially say, I am giving over the loan to Beit Din. All the loans which are owed to me, I'm handing over to Beit Din, and they can collect it on my behalf. And if they don't collect it on my behalf, I'm permitted to collect it for them. And essentially, that way you've passed all loans owed to you to Beit Din, and therefore there's no prohibition of lo yigos because they belong to Beit Din, they don't belong to you. And thereby, people started lending money again. It was a classic example where Hillel said, "This is the intention of the Torah." The reality, however, 1,000 years after the Torah has been given, that we've missed it's having the opposite effect, and therefore, using Torah Sheba'al Peh, he achieved the original idea of lending and ensuring that people are helped by instituting the Prusbul, and then coming back to the original idea of helping those in need. Some people have a custom that once they've written a Prusbul, they then give money as a halva'ah to a friend. That way they fulfill the mitzvah, halacha l'maisa, of getting to be mishamet, and then they don't ask for the money back. And you do it for charity, so you can lend to a charity, and the different charities that people do that they can actually lend after, once you've signed your Prusbul, then you give money to the tzedakah. It's a way of, again, saying we're signing up Prusbul to help ourselves, but what was the Torah's intention? And what can I do to sort of facilitate that this man has that? So I just wanted to end off with that idea.
Sure.
So I know, but we've got to work out a way to sort the heating out here. Yeah, it's central of the whole. All right, Yishakoach. We won't be learning next week for obvious reasons. We could do that, but Shana Tova, and I'll see you all around.